widely known these experiences are not readily available to tourists. We are in Cusco, which is the ancient high-altitude Inca city where you head off on the Inca Trail from, and we were staying in a youth hostel in a mixed dorm. We befriended a guy about our age. I think his name was Nick. He was American and immediately recognizable as the shady tweaker archetype. He had a scabby, shaved head and those really unhealthy, almost transparent teeth. But he was friendly, so we chatted with him when our paths crossed. He was always in his bunk, on his laptop. He said he was just resting until he was healthy enough to get on a plane back home, as he had partied too hard recently. At this particular hostel, power went on and off on a schedule. There was always electricity via generator, but there were only hot showers in the early morning and late night, like after 1 a.m. I had pretty terrible altitude sickness since we arrived and decided to stay up late to shower, hoping it would help me feel better. Altitude sickness is kind of like mild nausea and being slightly stoned at the same time. I get really bad altitude sickness actually, so I can relate. While I was showering, I heard Nick come in and ask, "Who's there?" I answered and we bantered for a minute. I heard him enter a shower and I finished up. I had forgotten to bring underwear, so I got dressed from the waist up and donned a towel for the walk back to the dorm room. The hostel was an adapted colonial courtyard building, pretty typical for Cusco, but it means you have to use exterior terrace walkways to move between rooms. It's really cold that night in Cusco, and I remember immediately after leaving the shower room feeling dizzy. I had to close my eyes and grip the doorway for a second so I wouldn't fall over. Right when I was starting to feel okay enough to move again, I felt a giant whooshing around me. I opened my eyes and realized all the power, including the generator, had shut off. It was pitch black and absolutely silent all around me except for bright flashes of light, like lightning bright, even though I could see the stars and there were no clouds in the sky. I called to Nick to see if he was okay, but there was no answer and no shower running, so I assume he had left before me. I started feeling my way down the walkway, carefully holding my towel in place. The lightning or whatever it was had stopped. When I got to the dorm door and began to unlock it with my key, I heard a body hit the tile walkway floor behind me with force. I looked back and made out the figure of what I assumed was Nick, apparently having a seizure and writhing on the ground. He was making a gurgling sound, and by the time I got to him, his mouth was oozing vomit. He was completely naked and soaking wet, and I started yelling for help. I still couldn't see much in the pitch black, but I will never forget his eyes. It was the first and last time I had seen the eyes of someone who was alive, but not really there. I rolled him on his side, but he kept choking. I was petrified, no kidding. But he kept grabbing my hands and trying to talk me through clenched teeth and vomit. He was saying something, but it was really fast and not in any recognizable language that I knew. I looked around and kept calling for help, but on instinct started trying to clear his throat with my hands. I had to pry his teeth apart to reach his mouth, and found that aside from the vomit, something was very wrong with his tongue. It was too sinewy and moving insanely fast, and then it wrapped around my fingers and gripped them tightly. I could feel it tightening until it hurt. I screamed and jerked away and started sobbing. He was still looking at me, but not really there. And I could just make out his tongue lashing around outside his mouth, thin and long like a snake's tail. My brain clicked that he must have somehow swallowed a small but very much alive snake. I was so confused by it, but that was the only logic in the moment that I could arrive at. At that point, some hostel staff came running with a flashlight and phone and started yelling in Spanish to whoever was on the other end. He yelled at me, "What did you take? Injections, pills?" He rattled off names of drugs I had never heard of before. I said I didn't know. found him like that. I think they see their fair share of overdoses, and he seemed more annoyed than shocked. When I looked at Nick in the new light of the flashlight, I realized his mouth was empty, save for some foamy vomit. There was literally no sign of the snake. I told the hostel staff man that there was a snake in there and pointed to Nick's mouth. He looked at Nick's mouth and saw absolutely nothing. He seemed angry at me for being what he assumed was high and unhelpful. I realized then that my towel had fallen off and I was semi-exposed. I think the hostel guy felt bad for me and just told me to go back to my room without any other exchange. So I got into my bed, still wet, put my headphones on, and shivered until I passed out. The next morning, I woke up late and alone in the dorm. Nick's stuff was still there, and when I made my way to the dining room, people were talking about what happened to him. It was mostly just gossip, but when everyone started speculating what he took, I just froze. My friend noticed I was turning white, so we excused ourselves and left. She tried to grill me on what I knew, and I told her that I had found him, that he was seizing and vomiting, but I could not, for the life of me, tell her about the snake. I still have not told her to this day, because as time passes, I feel less inclined to even believe myself. I don't know if I'm afraid she'd call me a liar. It's just so unfathomable. But I will never forget the feeling of a snake wrapping around my fingers and tightening until it hurt. Maybe this stupid gringo was tricked into thinking he could have some psychedelic transcendent trip by swallowing a live snake. We left the next day for our week-long Inca Trail trek to Machu Picchu as planned. We didn't see Nick around and assumed he was still at the hospital. When we returned from our trek to pick up our packs we stored there, I saw Nick's laptop in the storage room on top of a bag. I asked the attendant what happened to the guy who the stuff belonged to, and the receptionist said he's not coming back. Oh man. I don't love it. I mean, I like it as a scary story. The idea of a snake wrapping itself around my fingers. No, thank you. Alright, this one is also untitled. This is the scariest story I know. Bethany was my childhood best friend's college roommate. I was visiting my BFF at her college during her freshman year and stayed with them in their room. One night, we started talking about things that, as children, seemed normal, but in retrospect were different than we originally interpreted. For example, my BFF talked about how she had only just realized that when people's power went out, not everyone then got water from the creek to flush their toilets, like her family did, that kind of thing. And Bethany says, yeah, when I was little, my family moved out of our house in the middle of the night and never went back, and only when I was older did I realize people didn't do that kind of thing. She did not suggest that this was a ghost story at all, just a weird thing that had happened to her, and I can't convey this clearly enough. I'm about to tell the story more effectively than she did. I've told it a lot since then. She didn't have good timing. Her tone was casual. She didn't build it up as a frightening thing, just a weird thing that happened in her childhood. She shrugged a lot when she told the story. So Bethany starts to explain that as a child, her family moved around a lot because of her dad's job. They lived in lots of poorly kept rentals. Her parents also had a very unhappy marriage. Shortly before they finally divorced, her family moved into the nicest, largest place they ever lived in, but it was in the country and very remote. I think she said it was in the Florida Panhandle, but I'm not 100% sure. Just making sure I didn't mute this. It was a weird house, Bethany told us. We didn't like it. We were like, weird how? She said sometimes we would see faces in the walls, and sometimes the walls would bleed. Apparently lots of other more traditional haunted house type things happen there too. Objects moving, strange sounds, doors, windows opening, closing. She told us that whenever her younger sister was in the living room, she would start screaming and saying, "Mommy, stop burning me. Mommy, why are you burning me?" Even if her mom was nearby. But what was especially strange about this was that her sister never actually called their mom mommy, only mama. The only time she ever said mommy was in the living room when she screamed. According to Bethany, they didn't like the house from the time they arrived there, but the longer they stayed, the less they liked it. They only had one car, so her mom and the two girls could only leave the house to get groceries and go to church when their dad wasn't on the road for work. And the more her parents fought, the more frequently he was gone. The more he was gone, the worse things got with the house. Bethany told us that little by little, her family just started moving out of different rooms in the house. Whatever was happening in them was too intense, and they would just close the door to that room and stop using it. Her parents had one last huge blow up. Her dad, furious, leaves with the car. They expect him to come back the next day sobered up, but he doesn't, and days pass. By this time, Bethany and her mom and sister were really only living in the kitchen and one upstairs bedroom. In the closed-off rooms, they kept hearing things though, like voices, doors and windows slamming, objects breaking. Finally, one night, Bethany and her mom and sister are all together in the upstairs bedroom in one bed, and they can hear noises all throughout the house. Voices arguing together, screams, things smashing, keeps getting louder and louder until they finally hear a new noise. It's something pounding on the front door downstairs. The pounding continues until they finally hear the door being broken down, glass breaking, wood splintering. They hear footsteps pounding up the stairs. Then the bedroom door swings open and there's a man there from the church that they've only visited a few times. He says, "Get whatever you need to get and let's go." They gather up the things in that room in the kitchen in suitcases and trash bags, throw them into this man's truck, all without discussing it with him, and get the hell out of there. Back at his house, the man explains that he woke up in the middle of the night and knew he needed to find them and bring them to his house. Woke up his wife to tell her this, and she didn't question it. She also felt like this was something that needed to happen, even though they'd only met Bethany's family a few times. I should also say that they belonged to a denomination that was not into supernatural stuff the way some others are. This was not a miracle-believing, saint-rebuking kind of church. When the man got to Bethany's house, he could hear everything happening inside. At first, he thought it was her parents fighting, but then he could tell that somehow it was happening throughout the whole house all at once. He knew he needed to get inside, that her family was in danger. He was so convinced of this that when he found the door was bolted, he broke it down to get inside. But Bethany's mom hadn't bolted the door. The door didn't even have a bolt. And they never went back. At least Bethany and her sister and mom never did. Her dad might have eventually gotten furniture and stuff out, but they never went there again. In telling it, at this point, Bethany shrugged again and was like, "Yep, it was weird, but I didn't really think about it much at the time. As a kid, you just think everything that happens to you is pretty normal." My BFF and I were shocked. We tried to ask Bethany more details about things like what did the faces and the walls look like, but she didn't seem to want to talk about it much more, and we were too rattled to press for more. Bethany's now a stay-at-home parent with a couple of kids, married to a database admin, and lives in the suburbs of a mid-sized Midwestern city. I don't know why that sentence was so difficult for me. I only know her current whereabouts because of my best friend, who's still in touch with her. A few years ago, I asked about Bethany, and my best friend caught me up, but then I said, "Remember that story Bethany told us about the house they left?" And my friend was like, "Yes, I do, and I don't want to talk about it." So we never have. I will read one more. It is also untitled. When I was 10, my mom and I had to drive through the Colorado Rockies in the middle of the night. We were going home from a family reunion, and on that last leg home, crossing 6 states, she said we had enough money left for gas or to stay overnight in a hotel room, but not both. Everything on the trip had cost more than she had planned for, and she was pretty broke after recently divorcing my dad. So we basically coasted on fumes, financially speaking, from Denver to LA. It rained on and off, and we had to go slower than usual because of a thick fog that was almost as night we stopped for gas and I got out to buy some sodas. Before I went inside, I heard someone say, "Psst, psst, psst," and I was confused about where it came from until a kid about my age stepped out from the side of the ice machine. He was wearing dark sunglasses even though it was the middle of the night, and I thought maybe he was playing with me, maybe pretending to be a spy. "Will you buy me something?" he asked. I laughed nervously. "Like what?" "I don't know, I need to come into the store and pick it out." I felt awkward and mumbled no, turning toward the entrance. Right when I was about to pull the door open, the kid stepped out further from the ice machine and said, "Please, I'm hungry. I want a Coke, I want a Pepsi, I want a Doritos, I wanna..." He kept listing things off in a flat voice, and I remember feeling suddenly colder. I wondered why he wasn't wearing shoes or a jacket in this rainy weather, and I also wondered where his mom was. Then, bang, 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 a man was pounding on the glass door from inside and yelling at the kid, "I told you not to come around here, get the F out of here." Then the man turned to me and yelled, "Don't talk to him, don't let him in my store." I was terrified and ran back across the parking lot to the car. I locked myself in and tucked down in the back seat with my jacket over my head so I couldn't look out the window. When my mom finished pumping our gas, she got in the car and said, "If you're tired, you can just go to sleep." I guess to her I looked like I was sleeping, not hiding, and I was quiet as we pulled out of the driveway. Some hours later, we stopped for gas again, and I was still spooked. I would not have gotten out of the car if it weren't for the fact that I had to pee so badly. My heart was thumping. Oh, just that, I had to pee so badly. But my heart was thumping as I speed walked to get inside the bathroom. I had to get a bathroom key to use it. I didn't see anyone when I went outside to the bathroom or back inside to return the key, but when I turned around to leave, bam, 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 the cashier was banging on her window and yelling outside, "Don't talk to him, don't let him in here, he knows he can't come in here." She was screaming at my mom, who stood in the parking lot talking to a kid, the kid, who kept talking calmly even as the clerk kept banging on the glass. I tore outside to the car. "Mom, get in the car, get in the car, get in the car, Mom." I must have been about 20 feet away when I ran past them, but I felt near enough for him to touch me, like I was just about to feel his fingers on the back of my neck. When I got to the car, it was locked, and I kept pulling the door handle like it was miraculously about to open on its own. "Mom, let's go." I saw her say something to the kid, then she jogged back to the car, unlocked it, and I dove into the back seat again. "Go, go, 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 go," I said. When we were just about to turn out of the driveway, I peeked out the window to see if the kid was following us, and afterwards, I wish I hadn't. This is the image that sticks with me. He was standing on the edge of the lot, right where the pavement disappeared into tall grass, when he suddenly lurched over and slammed his palms to the ground. It was almost the same posture as downward dog in yoga, but instead of bending at the hips, his back arched up in the air in a perfect tight arch like a Halloween cat. It was grotesque and cartoonish and did not look human at all. Oh my god, I hate when I really hate when I hate when things move in odd, unhuman ways so much. Like, if you watch Jingle Jangle's video, she's always like, windows. She hates windows, but for me it's like odd movements. I cannot cope. I can't cope. Okay, we drove away, and my mom was silent, not asking me what happened or why I was sobbing. She put her hand on my knee and squeezed it a few times until I finally caught my breath. Finally, she turned to me and said, "Something's not right about that kid." She loves to tell this story at Christmas and other gatherings when she's had a lot of wine around a lot of people. She loves the part where she gets to say, "He asked her for a candy bar, but he asked me for a ride home." Oh man. Okay, maybe I read one more because I'm tripping. Okay, this one is titled, it's called "No Running in the Hall." In 1990, 1996, I was a 12-year-old girl adjusting to my new junior high school life. Things like moving between classes, lockers, gym clothes, and of course the new reality of hall monitors. Grim, omnipresent adults stationed between rooms with pads of pink detention slips. The most popular hall monitor was Mr. Francois. He was a large man, 6'4" and wide, with an impassive expression. He rarely smiled but seemed to be well liked among the students. I would see him hunched over in groups of students, chatting casually. Once I saw him slow dancing with an older student. That doesn't seem okay. Despite his friendly reputation, I was a rule follower and desperate to avoid the gaze of authority. So when I heard a voice booming at me over the sound of a dozen swishing backpacks, my heart hammered in my chest. I turned around. Mr. Francois was towering above me, stared fixedly at me from behind his large, square-framed glasses. "Where are you trying to get to so fast?" he said. I glanced at the students rushing past, starting to get around us. "I was just trying to catch up with a friend," I said. He shook his head. "There's no running in the halls." In one hand, he held up his pack of pink slips. "Now write me a paper about why there's no running in the school. Give it to me tomorrow before lunch, or I'll see you in detention." The possibility of lunch detention was beyond unsettling to my 6th grade self. I completed the assignment that evening, and the following day I scanned the corridor for Mr. Francois, spotting him in the middle of the hallway, leaning against a locker. I walked up to him with measured cautiousness, the epitome of a responsible student, fearing I might still somehow provoke punishment. "Here," I said, thrusting the handwritten paper into his hands, and then I walked away. The next time I thought about him was the summer before 8th grade. Someone turned on the news, and I found myself staring at a vaguely familiar face in the corner of the screen, a pair of dull, motionless eyes peering out from behind a large pair of square glasses. I read the text on the screen with a sense of sickness. Poughkeepsie man linked to slayings of 8 women. I watched as workers wearing white gloves and masks unloaded a series of bodies in the background. In the years that I was in middle school, 96 through 98, Kendall Francois killed 8 women, primarily substance-addicted sex workers. He hid their bodies in the home he shared with his parents and younger sister, telling them that the putrid smell of decay was emanating from a family of raccoons that had died in the walls. The bodies of his victims were rotting undetected for 2 years. Holy crap. At the time, I remember hearing rumors that Kendall Francois had murdered sex workers as an act of revenge, having contracted HIV from solicited sex. According to Wikipedia, he was HIV positive. However, it isn't clear whether this was a contributing factor in his serial killing or his primary motive. Regardless, it seems that he died without much regret, quoted as saying, "They all deserve to die." I disagree. I haven't thought about him over the last 20 years, reflecting on the experience this year. I was struck by the fact that an employee's killing spree was not publicly addressed at the school I attended. There were no assemblies, no counseling sessions, no parent support meetings, etc. The charges were brought against Kendall Francois the summer before I started